Okay, friends. It's okay. No, no worries. We're just getting started. Yeah, it's. Well, I don't want you to zip it for too long because we're going to get started, and I'll sort of give you a direction to then chat up a storm. That's the whole idea. So today we're going to end up talking. We're continuing our talk about purpose, and we're going to actually talk about spiritual resources, spiritual practices that are engaged with our sense of purpose. Because what we've been looking at over the last few weeks, first week we talked about why do we need purpose? Why do we need purpose? And thinking about the messages we get in older adulthood and how those end up just sort of eating away at us. And we need to end up redefining ourselves as life changes. We talked about how our purpose in our 20s and 30s is very different than 60s and 70s and even 80s and 90s, that we still have purpose, but that shifts. And so we need to take the time to be intentional, to say, what are we up to? So that was the first time. The last two times we've been looking at actually putting together a purpose statement. So we looked at core values, we looked at strengths, we looked at communities of impact. And then last time we ended up jumping into the idea that there are things that hold us back. There are fears, there's anxieties, and so we talked about those. And then put them all together to make sort of a Mad Lib purpose statement. So we've been keeping that pretty secular. And now I want us to talk more about the spiritual dimension. Because one of the things we as Christians end up affirming is that God has a purpose for each one of us, has gifted us with certain gifts and skills, and has set upon our hearts and lives a sense that we are able to make a difference and are supposed to be participating in God's work in this world. So,
Jews believe the exact same thing.
Exactly. Yep. I'm just working from. Yep. So Abrahamic faiths, all three of them do believe that there is a purpose, that God gifts us and calls us to live in the world in a way that helps to be a blessing to the entire world. And so where I want us to start today is I want us to start with Jeremiah 10 to talk about the idea of call. And so this is using intentional theological language. So I'll go ahead and read this for you. It goes on to the next page, but the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, of the priests who were at Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of King Josiah, son of Amon of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of King Zedekiah, son of Josiah of Judah, until the captivity of Jerusalem in the 5th month. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you to be a prophet to the nations. Then I said, Ah, Lord God, truly I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am only a boy, for you shall go to all to whom I send you, and you shall speak whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Lord. Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, now I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. So what I'd like you to do is, at your tables, talk about what you see going on here in terms of God's call to Jeremiah. What are the elements that are present? how is Jeremiah responding to it? And what are the different aspects of how Jeremiah is being commissioned to do stuff? Okay, so let's go ahead and talk for just a couple minutes. What are you seeing here? And then we'll bring it back to the larger group to continue a discussion. So what are you seeing? How is Jeremiah responding? What are the specific parts that God is asking him to do?
In the quote, it says that God will put the words in your, I will put the words in your mouth. So in other words, I'm not relying on you to do this on your own. I'm going to put the words in your mouth and give you the answers to do. Yeah, okay. Just like Moshe, who said, Moses said, you know, I have speech impediment, I can't do this, I can't lead the people, I can't speak. And he, God said, no, I've chosen you and I will give you the answers. Don't you think? I do, yeah.
And then here at the very bottom paragraph is, he put the words in his mouth, and then he said, I will appoint you over nations and kingdoms. He's going to serve them. Pull some out and pull some in. So he's doing both. He will destroy and overthrow.
See, he says both, destroy and overthrow as well as build and plant. So you have to destroy the evil, you can't just keep building and planting.
So what are some of the things that you were hearing at your tables? What were some of the parts that you heard about, this call of Jeremiah, how God was talking to Jeremiah, how Jeremiah responded? What were some of the things that you heard at your table?
Yes, tell them what you said, it was very good.
I started out by saying, often when God calls the different people that we read about, the people are arguing, oh, not me, no, I can't speak, I'm too old, I'm too young.
Yeah.
I'm just a boy, whatever. The ladies educated me, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so there's this idea that oftentimes when we experience that sense of call, when people experience that sense of call, it's sort of like, oh, I'm not worthy, I'm not able to do this, there's something about me that just makes that impossible.
Yeah.
Yep. What else? What else did you hear in this?
Well, we kind of decided that you have to figure it out yourself sometimes. Like, I'm good at this. How can I use this particular gift that God gave me? And
Yeah.
then you do. You use it if you can.
Yeah, I mean, our sense of call, most folks' sense of call isn't as clear and plain as this. I mean, it's not the two by four between the eyes. It's a much more subtle. It takes a lot more figuring out, okay, I think I'm good at this. I enjoy doing this. And then figuring out, okay, how does that tie into the work of God's kingdom? So that becomes definitely part of this. One of the things I want to make sure that you saw was that at the beginning, Jeremiah lays out how long, when it started, and then how long it came and continued. So, we have years and years and years here. That this isn't just, a little, okay, you have this isn't the, Star Trek where you have a 2-year mission and then you're done. I mean, this is ongoing, that this is through the reign of 3 kings until the captivity in Jerusalem, of Judah. into Babylon. And it's also God saying, this was from your birth. This is from the beginning. So when we listen to the call of Jeremiah, it's not just a one-time isolated thing, it's the entire life. And I think I heard some folks here saying, well, we can make up these, things of, well, I'm just a boy, but, well, I'm retired. Well, I'm a woman. Well, I'm, whatever. I don't move so well. We can end up coming up with all these excuses. And God says, I don't care.
See this last sentence? I supported you, I appointed you
A prophet to the nations.
So he's saying that to Jeremiah. So he's
Right.
saying, don't tell me this isn't your job.
Right. And so this is your job. I am appointing you. I'm saying, here you go. And Jeremiah, while again is that 2x4 between the eyes, we all affirm, Christians affirm, we all have this call. God has this call for each one of us. And it's not something that only special people have. Now, there's definitely only special people that are called to be prophets, and that kind of stuff, but the way that call works is it's to everyone. I also heard, so tell me more. What else were you guys talking about? What else came up in your conversations?
So build and destroy and then rebuild, build and plant.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's not all, it's not all building, it's both. You gotta get rid of the bad and then do the good.
Right. Right. So one thing we often say is, my sense of call is to just go out there and make the world a better place. Well, this isn't necessarily the case. Richard?
I only asked for that guidance, and God gave me the strength to do what I'm starting out to do.
Right. And so it does take, strength and courage and perseverance to respond to this call. It's not always easy. And sometimes, when we hear this, I point you to pluck and pull down, destroy and overthrow. I'm not so sure that I want to do that. To end up calling people to task. And one of the things we have to remember with Jeremiah was this is a particular point in time where things have gone pretty wrong in the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Well,
And then how often do we thank God for getting to or doing the project or whatever?
yeah. And so as we're thinking about that call, we want to talk about it being a lifelong sense, but there are certain phases that sort of like, oh God, thank you for that help going through this, making it through this point or this part that was really hard. Parenting is a calling. Oh my God, I finally got through it. They're off to college. Now I get to be worried about a different set of things. But no, they do come back. It does never end. It absolutely doesn't end, that call to parenting. And so that becomes something that we need to pay attention to. That sometimes there are points that it's not fun, that we are called to keep on persevering, and we remember, thank you for being with me through this. And so when we talk about this idea of call, Jeremiah gives us some really good resources to consider, what are the different aspects that God is the one calling, God is the one active, God is the one who is empowering us, and God's setting the agenda. It may not always be so clear and easy. Again, Jeremiah is 2x4 between the eyes. For us, it's not so easy, but that sense of call never ends. And so what I want us to do now is I want us to watch a short 5-minute video from a guy named Frederick Buechner. He was a Presbyterian minister and a poet and writer, and he did this video a number of years ago for a group called the Fund for Theological Education. It's an organization that's funded, I think, through the Lilly Endowment in Indiana to help support people to go to seminary. And he actually received a grant to go to seminary for this. And so he's going to talk about his sense of vocation, and he has some real gems in this about how he understands the idea of Christian vocation and individual call to ministry. Come on. I lost my mouse. There we go. No, it was just finding it. Hold on.
I've tried to speak more to the sort of the hidden hunger in even the most unlikely people for whatever the word God refers to. The place you're called to be is a place where your deep gladness and the world's deep need meet. Both those things. So many people get into some line of work by chance. It's what their father did or their mother did or what seems to open up at the time and that happens to pay the kind of money that they feel they need. To encourage young people to think seriously about what they really want to give their lives to before they sort of get into this pattern that's going to take them, heaven knows, 40 years. There's a wonderful novel by John Marquand, that forgotten American novelist, called A Point of No Return, I think, where a young man finally gets, all his life he has struggled to become president or vice president of the bank he works on. Finally he does it, he gets it, he makes it. He's given the office, he's given the salary, and he's, my God, I've spent my whole life trying to get to this point, and now that I've gotten it, I realize it's nothing that I want to do at all. So to get people to stop and think and consider whatever sort of ministry it is, well, one of the things that I think would appeal to young people about the ministry in whatever form, either in a church or as a writer or as a teacher, is that it's one of the few places where you were not only permitted but encouraged to speak with real honesty out of the depths of who you are. My first job was teaching at the same school that I went to as a child, Lawrenceville, in prep school in New Jersey. And I left there in 1953 to become a full-time writer. I'd already written 2 novels, the first of which did extremely well. In fact, did better than anything else I've written since, which is a depressing thing about it. But nonetheless, I moved to New York to become a full-time writer. The place where I lived was right next to the Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church, which had as its minister in those days this marvelous man, George Arthur Buttrick, marvelous preacher. And he was talking about the temptation scene, the temptation of Christ, and how Satan takes him up to the top of the mountain and says, you can be king of all of this if you'll simply kneel down and worship me. And Buttrick said, Jesus turned him down, he wouldn't do that. But he said, nonetheless, Jesus is crowned king again and again in the hearts of those who believe in him, amidst confession and tears and great laughter. And the phrase great laughter caught me so off guard, perhaps, for other reasons. I just absolutely, it was, in some ways, it really was the turning point of my life. Tears sprung from my eyes, and I knew I had to do something. The fund, I can't remember how it came into my life. I can't remember who told me about it. Somebody did, and it was just made to order for me, because in those days it was aimed at people who had not yet made up their mind one way or the other, but who thought that it might be interesting to spend a year in a seminary just to find out more about what they might want to give their lives to doing, and that was exactly my position. I had been deeply moved by this sermon by Buttrick and by other things to think that maybe, despite all the reasons for finding it incongruous, maybe the ministry was for me. And one thing led to another, and I've interviews and letters and all that sort of thing. And finally, I went to Union Seminary, and that was the sort of pivotal moment of my youth. I wanted so much to know about things that I really didn't know much about at all, and was sitting at the feet of these absolutely marvelous teachers. So my gratitude to the Rockefeller brothers is huge. I think without their fellowship, who knows what I might have done. Maybe I could scrape the money together and go on anyway, but anyway, I went because they made it possible. I wouldn't give it up for anything because it led me into situations, it led me into the lives of people, it led me into my own life as nothing else I can imagine doing would have done. If you're thinking about it, give it a try because you never know where it's going to take you. It was such a rich experience for me. I think it's wonderful that it still goes on.
This is a metabolism.
Come on, stop.
This is a metabolism killer. And even this is a metabolism killer. The sad
Done. Sorry, I had to turn the volume up, and so I was turning it down so I didn't blast you guys out. So one of the things that Buechner ends up talking about is there's a quote that the place you are called to be is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep need meet. And so when we're thinking about what we're doing with purpose here, we talked about, what are those core values, what are those strengths, what are those communities of impact. And so it's this recognition that I have skills and places that I enjoy putting myself out, putting myself out there to help others, to be engaged with others. And when I do that, where that meets the needs of the world, that's where God's call is. That's where God's call is for you. I mean, you could hear that sort of in Jeremiah. There was a little bit of resistance, but there was also, I'm giving you these gifts and skills to meet what is needed in the world at this time. So with our understanding of call, our understanding of life lived with God's purpose in mind, our purpose should be, can often be right in line without doing anything different. Because how we want to make an impact actually meets the needs of the world. The thing is, we have to be mindful about it. We have to recognize, here's where God is acting. And so instead of it being a burden, it becomes a joyful response to what God has already done. And so, yes, there are parts of our lives that are definitely burdens, that part of our vocation and calling, can be drudgery. I mean, I'm thinking about all the teachers out there and all the grading that you have to do and all the, in-services. I mean, it's sort of like, ugh, that's a drudge. But there's still that point of connecting with the kids and seeing something click and you're suddenly, there. That's where that joy meets the need of the world. And so Buechner is trying to say, hey, listen, there are points that our lives have that resonance where what we enjoy, what we find nourishing and fulfilling and helps other people meet their needs, God is present. The other thing that I wanted to point out with Buechner, with this short video, was that Buechner shows something that happens with all of our lives and our sense of call. He ended up teaching, and then he was writing, and that was successful, and so he went full-time writing, and then he ended up going to seminary because he heard this sermon that really inspired him and brought up questions that he had been struggling with for a while. That's something that we also talk about with regards to God's call in our lives. It's never a straight shot. It's never, okay, one point A and point B, go there. It's point A to point B via point C, D, E, F, G, H, all the way through triple Z or whatever. Our lives end up meandering and going in different directions. I've often heard of it, at least I've talked about it, that I didn't understand why I had to go through that and that until I had this thing down the road. You know, my first call was to North Lima Presbyterian Church. And as we were driving out, because Tracy and I were living here in the Milwaukee area, and it's out in Whitewater, 63 miles one way. And I said, oh God, no. And then I drove out there and I saw 3 sides were a cornfield and the 4th was a woodlot. Oh God, no. And then when I went in to meet with the people, they weren't quite ready for me, and they asked me to wait up in the sanctuary with the pink wallpaper and the red shag carpet. And I was sort of like, oh God, no. And then I ended up going downstairs, meeting with the people, and it was, oh God, yes. There was that sense of connection. And I was sort of like, I shouldn't be here part-time. I should be at a full-time call. And it was only half-time. But because of that part-time position, I ended up having to make it up as I went. I ended up using my landscape architecture background. Why did I go through 5 years of undergraduate and work for a couple years in Chicago to only go to seminary? Oh, well, here I am, able to support myself, my family, with the church and part-time landscape architecture. Then I was able to be stated clerk of the presbytery because I had extra time. Did that for 6 years. I was able to be an associate pastor at another church 10 miles the other direction, one direction, because I was part-time. When you start looking back, that's when you're able to really see, here's how this all was working together. Part of God working with us, responding and opening up new possibilities. So call is not something that we say, okay, here's point A, point B, it's a straight shot. It meanders. So what I'd like you to chat about at your tables is to see how, in your life, both that idea of, the place of your great deep gladness meets the world's deep need is a sense of God being present. So that's the first one. Think about that. And then the second one is going to be about that meandering of your sense of call, that meandering of your life. So first, let's talk at your tables about where you've seen the place of God's call being your deep gladness meeting the world's deep need. Okay? Chat for a few minutes and we'll share it back.
Lost my parents very young. In fact, I just right before my 9th birthday and a couple months after my 9th birthday. And wound up not quite feeling like I belonged here for the longest time. And it took me years to come up with the fact that God had that plan for me in the classroom because I could understand students who needed understanding more so than ever. The other thing was I came along really, really late in life from my mother. And I think being here, I understand older people because I grew up with everybody was a lot older than I ever was. So I was always the youngster. And people still call me the baby here. But it's just been, it pays off. It's, it's because I was around so many older people, always older than I was. I had a sister 20 years older, one 19 years older, and a brother 15 years older. So, and me. Like that. So, yeah. But it was the plan originally. Yeah.
So you can see that God put in the cure before he brought the problem. In other words, he put to get you the skill No, all right, because mine is so clear, it's like, for me, I can't deny divine intervention, because my life is constantly, I can constantly see the path that God laid out.
All the changes myself.
I wanna hear from you guys. All right, now you're up. A what?
Listener.
No, you're not a listener.
That's very important, though. People need listeners. That's one of my best skills. People need listeners.
Listener and then keep quiet about what I've heard.
Well, that's part of it too.
That's part of it
Things
too.
that happened that you thought maybe you couldn't understand why that was happening, then later you could see that it was God's hand? No?
Sorry, asking all these questions. I can't imagine you didn't know my
Yeah.
It will. Figure this out yet. Yeah. That's okay. Absolutely. I'm sure you'll think
We don't always get immediate answers.
Sometimes the questions just make you think.
And at 3 o'clock, don't call me. Don't call me.
So, friends, what are some of the things you heard at your tables? What are some of the big overarching themes you might have heard?
I lost my parents at a very young age. I was 6 days before my 9th birthday. I lost my dad, and a couple months later, I lost my mom. And threw me into chaos, really honest chaos. But as I became a teacher, I realized there were a lot of students that were going through a lot of things at home. And I think it really, really helped that I could understand those kids who needed me. And I've made some lasting friendships with my students that, not so much now that I follow them on Facebook, and some of them, I know their kids and what they're doing still. And I retired in 2008, and they were 4th graders still. The other thing is I came along really, really late. And my siblings were all at least 15 to 20 years older than I was. And so I grew up around all these older people who, as a matter of fact, happened to die while I was growing up. And so I tell people I grew up in the funeral home. But you get used to being around that. And I think being here is my call right now to listen to the people at Dixon Hollow and help where I can.
And so what I heard you say is that you didn't necessarily know it at the time, but that the experiences that you had early on in life, losing your parents right around your 9th birthday, that actually prepared you to be able to be a teacher and connect to the students that are dealing with loss and grief and the pain that goes with that. You were able to connect easily with that, and then also the way that you were around older people throughout your growing up years, that it's allowed you to continue to be present with older folks. So that, and you find joy in that. You found joy working with the kids. You're finding joy with working with folks who are dealing with the effects of older age, and so that becomes a place of joy. But it's also meeting the needs of other people, and so it's that place where your deep joy meets the world's deep need. Anything that you guys talked about that you want to share?
Well, I just said that as a kid, I had no choices. I did exactly what my parents wanted me to do. They told me to do this, I did it. They told me not to do that, I didn't do it. And I had really no say in the first 18 years of my life. But I think the values and the core things that they gave me helped me continue.
Yeah.
Even though maybe at times I resented it.
Yeah, so this idea that, growing up, there were lots of confinements for your life and lots of places where you didn't have choice, and you were the dutiful daughter. The oldest daughter. Imagine that, the oldest daughter being the dutiful one. I've never seen that happen before. You're unique, Marty. But that ended up preparing you by giving a whole host of gifts and skills to relate to others, to find that point of being in connection with them, because the core values were so clearly defined.
That's why I think I asked so many questions.
Yeah. asking questions because you didn't have that opportunity as a youngster. And so that can actually become a great place of saying, okay, this encourages me to still be a curious adult now. It pushes me in a different place. And by asking those questions, by being curious, you bring out all kinds of gifts for other people. And so that can be a calling too. So why don't we talk briefly about that idea of the twists and turns? Where are some places in your lives that you've seen twists and turns where, you're sort of like, oh, this doesn't make any sense right now, but then looking back, a couple years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, things suddenly make sense. So why don't you talk for just a couple minutes and then we'll go ahead.
The question is, how do you make those kinds of decisions? How do you go here and how do you go there?
How do you go here and how do you go there? That becomes,
I
that's,
faced a very large fork in the road, as they say, when I was quite young, as a matter of fact, which actually brought me to Menominee Falls instead of California. And at my age at that time, which was only about 25, this was a big one because I had 4 children, I had 3 children at the time, wasn't making enough money to get along well. The opportunity here was less money than the opportunity in California. How did I make the decision to come here instead?
how did you make the decision to come here instead? You are anticipating the next point that I'm going to be making. And so
So the question is, what happened then and why?
Go ahead, Elle.
I don't want to anticipate, but I'm just sitting there thinking about the whole thing. I was thinking back, we really don't know why things happen, but in the long run, good or bad, you're grateful that they did.
Yeah. We don't always know in the moment. And
The benefit analysis.
right. Yeah, you did the cost benefit analysis.
It's closer to my family.
Right.
For one, a little closer to friends.
Mhm.
I wasn't sure I wanted to move that far.
Right.
1955 or 60. Ooh, that would have been a vanity.
Right.
And a long ways away. And I thought, oh no, I want to stay a little closer to my little hometown,
Mhm.
which is Delavan.
Hey, I know plenty of really great folks from Delavan.
So anyway, that was.
I'm not sure you're one of them, but
I'm going back to my room.
please don't. Ellie.
I don't know how to say this exactly because basically one of the things that was a big change in my life was the loss of my father.
Mhm.
But at the time, I guess you had to accept he passed away from leukemia, and back then you couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So it was something. But my mother shouldered everything and carried on, and I had a brother and a sister who went back, and she went back to teaching, and some of those things, her determination to succeed in that was part of maybe what came out of that.
Yeah. So you end up looking back and saying, okay, the loss of my father was a tragedy. It broke hearts. And your mother's choices to go back and teach and hold everything together in a world that wasn't necessarily kind to that really left an impression and helped you develop who you were.
Well, and because we knew that she was able to go back to teach because of her education, boy, that said to us, boy,
Yeah.
our education, my brother and sister and I, we just knew.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no question.
So you and your siblings were getting an education. There's no question because your mother's education was what kept you guys in an okay position. It wasn't great, I'm sure, but it was an okay position. And so, so we do see these twists and turns along the way that God's call moves us in and out. And when we're talking about, well, how do I know if this is God's call? How do I know if this is God working inside me, or as one professor at McCormick Seminary, or is it the pizza from the night before moving? I mean, how do you know whether it's the Spirit moving or if it's just something else? And so Reformed Christians, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, will often talk about the idea of call as a three-legged stool. That in order to really determine and discern call, there's 3 elements in there. The first is that God is active and moving. God is encouraging and calling you to do something. That's the hardest part to understand, quite honestly. The second leg of that stool is the individual's sense of who they are and what they're good at, and essentially what you've done on that purpose statement. But then we talk about a crucial third leg. The third leg of that stool is community. A community of faith that ends up saying, we've heard and seen and lived with you, and we affirm what you're saying, or sometimes we think you should probably try this or add this in. And those are, it's not necessarily, you can think back, 50, 75 years, the board of elders of the church calls you in and says, okay, here's what you should be doing. This isn't that kind of thing. It's where people together are listening and knowing one another and saying, hey, I see this gift in you. I see this ability. Have you ever explored how to do this in a new and different and interesting way? And so we end up seeing that sometimes when people are called to be elders or deacons here in the Presbyterian Church, that they're sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you bring them in and they're sort of like, oh, yeah, I can do this. And they find it fulfilling as well. I mean, we have that time and time again where people, by the community of faith, are encouraged and pushed in ways that they wouldn't expect, and suddenly something in them starts to bloom. Something grows and changes. And so that community of faith that surrounds all of us, that we are all part of, we're supposed to be encouraging and discerning together, saying, yes, that absolutely is a gift that you have. We should keep you going on that and doing that. And at times it's also, it feels like you're burned out and doing something that isn't giving you life. Maybe you should be backing away. I remember one time where I was at that first church, and the longtime organist had a health issue, and she hadn't been able to play for a while. And she came back and played once, and the music was fine. But at the end of the service, she ended up talking to me and saying, these people, they're just not doing this or this and this. And I was like, time out, hold on. It feels like you may not be called to be here at this congregation anymore. Not that I want you to go. I love you, Bev. But maybe it's time for you to go someplace else that feeds you in a different way. Because part of it was that she was having issues with carpal tunnel. And so that was, but she had such a clear identity of herself as the church organist that she couldn't see herself any other way. And so it was sort of like, well, check out, a couple other churches in town. I don't want to see you go. I want to remain, connected with you. But if you need to go, go. And a couple years later, she said, oh, that was absolutely what was needed at that point. The community of faith, through all of us, with those urgings inside, those moments that sort of you're just insight that you don't know where it comes from, maybe that becomes a point where the Spirit is using you to encourage others to follow God's call on their lives. Because call is not just about me and God. It's about me, God, and the community of faithful. The group that we're called together to be part of. And so as we continue to think about this, purpose, maybe we need to look at where are those other pieces coming in? Where do we need to be talking with friends who are also part of our community of faith? I mean, even if they aren't part of our congregation, our friends are still part of that community of faith. Talking it over, saying, hey, I'm seeing this. What do you see in me? Does this feel like the right thing for me based on what you know of me? Now, it can be that they're totally wrong. I mean, I want to give you that. There are plenty of times that I'm totally wrong and I think I hear something and it's not. But sometimes that conversation with a friend is what can help bring things up, bubble things up, and make it a little bit clearer. That conversation with a group of folks, that can become the point of entry so that we're able to say, okay, I think I'm more confident about God's call in my life. For both Tracy and myself, my wife and I, we both went through an ordination process where it was, okay, you need to get a master's degree and also do this time of discernment. Try things on, work in a few churches, work in chaplaincy positions, and then come back and talk with a group brought from not just one congregation, but congregations all over the area to say, does this feel like this person has these gifts and skills and the passion, and are we feeling it? It's again, that three-legged stool of God, the person, and the community. And so when we're looking at our purpose, my encouragement over the next week, or actually a couple weeks, is for you to take some time and maybe sit down with a friend. Talk it over. Say, here's what I have. Does this feel right with my core values and my, with my strengths and with the communities that I want to impact and with some of my anxieties, my concerns? Does that feel right? Have them participate in a conversation with you. Maybe it's, a spouse that you're having that conversation with, a family member, a sibling, someone to just bounce the ideas off of and hear what they have to say, because that can often bring clarity to what is there for a sense of call. Sandy, did you have a question? Okay. No, I'm so sorry. And everyone noticed that Sandy actually dribbled some water down. I know, great. I'm sorry about calling that out. So anyway, that would be my encouragement. And maybe also look at what you've put down. Does what you put down in terms of core values and strengths and gifts and skills and communities of impact, do those things bring you joy? Is it that deep gladness that Buechner talks about for you? Do those things that you've put down bring that deep gladness when you actually do them? Because if that's the case, then that's probably call. That's probably God working through you, because it can end up meeting the world's deep need. And that becomes the next part, is how do we take what we are feeling and put it into action? And so that's going to be our next session. We're going to be talking about putting our sense of call, our purpose, into action in this time and place. And also talking about how a community of faith can help bring that to pass. How we as Living Hope, as Dixon Hollow, can support one another and encourage one another to truly live out that purpose. Because when we do that, we're not only fulfilling God's will, but we're also giving ourselves a longer lease on life that's more meaningful and bringing more happiness for us and the world around us. Which, guess what? That's the definition of the kingdom of God. That God, the kingdom of God, when joy bubbles up and forms around us and brings us into the presence of the divine that was already there that we just didn't see. So that's sort of the next step, is saying, how do we operationalize this? How do we take those things that I know about myself and make an impact? And how then do we together encourage each other to live that out. So that's sort of where we're headed. What other insights do you folks have? What other questions might you have? Okay. Why am I going to kick one of you out? Absolutely not. No. Well, you have to remember, Bev was also an irascible old soul that, if she thought that something shouldn't be done that certain way, she was going to tell you, and it caused all kinds of upset in the congregation. And on top of that, folks, got on her last nerve, and it was just sort of like, okay, you've been here too long. It's not quite the right spot for you. And I didn't kick her out. I didn't kick her out. It was more saying, is this the right spot for you? And asking that question. Because that woman was an absolute gem. I loved how she was straightforward. She told you where you were. If she wasn't happy with you, she knew, but it wasn't mean and malicious. But it was straightforward, and it could rub some folks the wrong way. But it was also that discernment. Is this the right spot for you at this time? I'm not going to get rid of any one of you. I love you guys all too much. And with Bev, I continued to visit her. I continued to spend time and saying hi. And so, even though she left, I was probably there another 3 years. I still saw her on a regular basis. I popped in when one of her sons died of cancer. I ended up, just seeing her in passing. And so, yeah, it was just fine. No, Marty, you're not allowed to leave. You asked too many good questions. So anyway, friends, yeah, Patty.
You named 3 legs for the stool.
Right.
I have the last one, the community of faith. What were
The first leg of the stool is God and God's action. The second one is the individual sense of response to that action. So it's God, us, and the community of faith. That's the 3-legged stool for that sense of call. When we're figuring out, is this really call? We have to be listening for the Spirit. We have to be experiencing it ourselves. It has to be congruent with who we understand ourselves to be. So that purpose statement is right there. And then finally, God's action, or the community of faith, affirming it and possibly pushing even in a different direction. Okay? So friends, in a couple weeks, we will finish up with this series and have that last discussion. So thank you so much.